Oh, hi there. Ollie Anderson here. You're listening to Creative Status. This is a podcast about tapping into our realness. That means that we're ultimately learning to unconditionally accept ourselves as creatures that are on a constant evolution towards a deeper connection to wholeness. That means connection to ourselves, connection to other people, connection to life itself. Basically, learning to uncover the truth and then live the truth. Today I want to talk about synchronicity. I'm actually going to make this a short episode. I always say that I'm going to do a short episode and then I just end up rambling for like half an hour. Today I just want to talk about 3 different levels of things that either are or are not synchronicity, but that we think are synchronistic experiences sometimes. And if we're incorrect, it can end up taking us off of the path that we really want to be on, which is the path towards wholeness. Because a lot of the time, the things that we think are synchronicities just end up being a reflection of our own fragmentation, but we're projecting it out into the world from our unconscious, and then we reflect it back at ourselves and experience it as a synchronistic event. I want to say in this short podcast that synchronicity is a real thing, but a lot of the time, the things that we think are synchronicity are actually something else. So let's get into it. So before I give you the 3 different levels that we can start to understand synchronistic experiences at, let's just go over a quick overview of what synchronicity even is. The word synchronicity was coined by Carl Jung in his book in the 1950s or something like that called Synchronicity and a Causal Connecting Principle. He wasn't the first person to spot that synchronicity was a thing. He just named it as this phenomenon, synchronicity. And ultimately, it can be defined as when 2 things come together in time and space that seem to be completely unrelated, but they seem very meaningful at the level of the person who is experiencing it because of their interpretations. The subjective meaning that can be put onto this synchronistic event or extreme coincidence, if you want to call it that, is usually so far beyond the pale of far beyond any probability of it being just a random chance that it just seems so meaningful and significant to the person who's experienced it. Even though Carl Jung termed synchronicity or named it synchronicity, it's something that all human beings have experienced throughout human history, at least once or twice in their lives. In Vedic philosophy, synchronicity is just seen as meaning that you're in alignment with your dharma, i.e. you're walking on the path that you're supposed to walk on. In Taoism, there is wu wei, where you kind of act without acting, and when you get into that flow state and you align yourself with the Tao, things just kind of work out and you have these meaningful experiences that we now call synchronicity. In Christianity, they believe that if you get a synchronicity, then you are probably aligned with God's will and all these kind of things. So it is a very common phenomenon, and it's something that many people experience in their lives. And it's something also that a lot of people want to experience, because a lot of the time we can kind of think that if we are getting these synchronicities, then we're doing something right. And if we're not getting them, then we need to mix things up. And that leads people down some interesting paths that I'm going to talk about in a second. One of the most famous examples of synchronicity is in Carl Jung's book that I just mentioned, Synchronicity and a Causal Connecting Principle, where he tells a story about how he was working in his office with a client one day, with a patient, and this woman that he was working with was really struggling to come to terms with the fact that the unconscious mind was even a thing, and that rationality and left brain thinking and all those kind of very cerebral ways of looking at life and interpreting life, normally, in my opinion, because of control freakery, because of underlying shame and that kind of thing, this woman was struggling to let go of that way of thinking and to embrace the fact that there was something more to life, there was something bigger. During the session, Carl Jung spoke to this woman about a dream that she had, and she told him how she had a dream about a scarab beetle, and Carl Jung basically kind of started to deconstruct this dream that she had and realized that the scarab beetle was a symbol for change and growth and all these kind of things in ancient Egypt, and that the woman was basically on the threshold of letting go of these rationalistic ways of thinking that were actually holding her back from the life she wanted to be living. So, long story short, Carl Jung started to work with this woman, and she had some kind of a breakthrough, or she started to at least be open to what he was saying as the story goes. But then the thing that tipped her over the edge was there was suddenly a kind of tapping on the window in Carl Jung's office, and he went over to the window, and there was a scarab beetle, just like in the dream, although in the dream it was a golden one. This was like the Swiss equivalent of a scarab beetle. But anyway, he opened the window, he caught it, he brought it in, and he showed it to the woman. And Carl Jung used this as an example of one of these very meaningful experiences where two unrelated things happen in time and space. So this scarab beetle tapping on the window and the patient talking about the significance of that beetle within her dream. And it came together to kind of open things up for this patient and to open things up for Carl Jung as well, no doubt. And to put them both in the present moment to an extreme degree. That's what I think a real synchronicity is. It's something that occurs when you let go of your resistance, you let go of ego distortion, and you just finally surrender to the present moment. And then you find yourself on the path you were supposed to be on, and then these things kind of happen. I'm getting a bit ahead of myself because that's the third point I want to make in this podcast. But for now, that's what synchronicity is. It's when two things occur in time and space. They seem exceptionally meaningful. It goes beyond any odds of what seems reasonable or just rational in scare quotes. And we can take some deeper meaning from the incident itself that can allow us to move forward in life in a real way. So now that I've said that, I just want to go over these three takeaways that I want to give you in this episode about the three different levels of things that appear to be synchronistic, two of which are not necessarily a synchronicity. The third is the real synchronicity, which is ultimately what I just said. We're connected to wholeness, and we're either returning to the path that we're supposed to be on, or we're just walking down that path because we've already done the inner work and we're not distancing ourselves from it. And then we're just going to keep experiencing these kind of very meaningful synchronicities as we keep walking deeper and deeper into wholeness. So in every one of these solo episodes, I like to try and give you three takeaways that you can reflect on after the episode or use to guide yourself as you move through life. Ultimately, this episode is no different. It's based around three different levels that we can kind of experience these kind of synchronistic events. These levels are the level of the conscious mind working within the context of what it already knows and thinks that we know about ourselves and life. Then the second is the unconscious level, where the unconscious is talking to the conscious mind. And then the third level is just universal consciousness, if you want to call it that, or wholeness bursting through the cracks of the fragmented relationship that we have with ourselves, or that shows us that we're either returning to the path, like I keep saying, because we've let go of the tension and the ego distortion and resistance that kept us from the path, or we're just walking on it. So I'm just going to break these down really quickly. The first level, like I said, is the level of the conscious mind. The level of the conscious mind, ultimately in this context, just means that we're experiencing these coincidences because of the way that we consciously have decided to go looking for them for some reason. The most common reason that we consciously decide we're going to start looking for these synchronicities or signs is that we don't trust life to the extent that we want to. And so we start to kind of test life by telling ourselves that if we can find a sign, then it means that life can be trusted. And then obviously we can start making all kinds of changes and take a leap of faith to do the things that we really want to do. Pattern that I've noticed though, is that people that get caught up in this level of just the conscious mind looking for signs, i.e. making a conscious decision to find them, they never really make any changes when they do see the signs. They just look for the next sign and the next sign and then the next sign. And they get caught up in this cycle of just constantly looking for signs and then never actually changing or transforming their lives in the way that they want to. What's really interesting to me about this conscious level of synchronicity, if you even can call it synchronicity, is that ultimately it's a case of our brains tricking us into thinking that something is more meaningful than it actually is. there's a part of the brain called the reticular activation system. And ultimately, it's a series of stems and things like this at the bottom of your brain, I think. And basically, it's responsible for determining where you focus your attention. And where it focuses your attention is based on what you believe, what you're looking for at a given time, what's most significant in your life, etc., etc. The classic example of the reticular activation system in action is if you buy a new car, for example, maybe you bought a Mini, then all of a sudden you're going to start seeing Minis all over the place when you're out driving that Mini. And it's because your brain is basically been programmed at that moment in time to have Minis at the highest point of what it considers to be relevant for where your awareness and attention should be focused. So if we start looking for signs and we're consciously telling ourselves that we need signs like angel numbers or, I don't know, maybe some star sign bullshit thing, whatever it is, then we're ultimately telling our brain to start looking for these things. And that doesn't mean that it's a synchronicity, because actually with a real synchronicity, it's not something that we can consult or that we can go looking for. It comes uninvited from above and beyond on its own terms when you are ready to see it. If you go looking for it because you don't trust and you feel like you need a sign to kind of give you that extra kind of nudge into trusting life a little bit more, then that is actually just your relationship with yourself being reflected out into life. It's not life trying to break into your conscious awareness and bring you back into a greater relationship with life. The most common example probably of this is angel numbers. And I think if you look at angel numbers rationally, it can really help you to understand why this is not like a synchronistic sort of highly meaningful, potent symbol of the universe trying to speak to you or anything like that. It's just us tricking ourselves into thinking things are meaningful. So if you think about angel numbers, this is the thing where people think if they see a 1 or a 2 or a double number of any kind, then somehow something magical is happening and they can trust life, even though, like I said, nobody has ever seen an angel number as far as I know and then dropped all their fears and doubts and just gone out there and started trusting life and doing the things that they really want to do. They just look for the next one and the next one and the next one. Unfortunately for them, if you think about it, every hour there are 5 opportunities to see these angel numbers. There's the 1, the 2, the 3, 4, 5. That happens 120 times, I believe, in a 24-hour period. And that means if you have told your reticular activation system to start looking for these angel numbers so you can finally trust life, then of course you're going to have a very high chance of seeing them as you go throughout your day, especially if you're one of these people who's on your phone all day, like scrolling through social media, and you've got a clock up there at the top of the phone screen. You're going to keep seeing these numbers. And then you're going to tell yourself, oh, okay, wow, like I've seen this angel number and so I can trust life. But then you probably won't make any changes because you're only working at the level of conscious mind, and you're only really going to change your life if you can start working with the unconscious mind and all the blocks and patterns that are holding you back because of what's going on down there. So that brings us on to the second takeaway, which is that a lot of the time we think we're experiencing a synchronicity, which is where, universal truth or whatever you want to call it is breaking through into our lives because we have let go of some ego resistance or ego distortion or whatever it is that's keeping us from that in the first place. And then we start to have these kind of experiences where we do feel connected to everything. At the level of the unconscious mind, if you've been listening to this podcast or seen my YouTube channel or anything like that or read my books, you'll know that a lot of the time our unconscious relationship with ourselves and the blocks and the things that are causing us to hold back and hesitate from real life are ultimately our unresolved emotions. Normally it's shame, guilt, and trauma. All of those things cause us to create an ego version of ourselves so we can feel a sense of control over our lives and not have to face that stuff before we're ready. When we do that, we have a huge disjunct between our conscious way of identifying and who we actually are beneath the surface, because we end up sending so many real parts of ourselves into the shadow territory. Those real parts can be our goals, our goals, our intentions, our values, our feelings, our thoughts, our opinions, our real emotions, all that kind of stuff, and also our capacity to accept reality or truth and to build in alignment with it. If we have these unconscious blocks, then a lot of the time we are going to find ourselves experiencing synchronicities, again, if you want to call them that, in the external world, but it's not, it's not a case of the universal consciousness breaking through. It's actually our emotional stuff that we're hiding from ourselves, trying to get our attention. This is one of the most common kind of pitfalls I see people kind of fall into on these healing journeys, or whatever you want to call them. Like, they experience things, but they think it's something much deeper than it is, when actually it's just their emotions trying to get their attention in a way that helps them to be able to face it without destroying the ego in a way that's too uncomfortable. A really common example is like you get people going to see astrologers or like energy healers or tarot card readers and all this kind of stuff, and they ultimately get some kind of a meaning from the tarot card, let's say, just to keep it simple, and they think that the meaning is in the card, but actually the meaning that they're getting is just their interpretation based on whatever is going on inside them. Carl Jung, once again, he said something very similar about dreams. Like, when it comes to interpreting your dreams, you don't know for sure if you're 100% right, like if what you interpreted the dream to mean is factually accurate. But it doesn't actually matter, because what you interpret the dream to mean is the interpretation itself that shows you what's actually going on inside you. So if you see a tarot card, for example, and it's got a picture of a cat on it or something, and it makes you believe that your dead cat is speaking to you from beyond the grave, then actually that probably means that you have some kind of unconscious desire to still hold on to the memory of your dead cat, because it's too painful to just let it go and to accept that, the cat is gone and so on and so forth. And I don't mean that in an insensitive way, but ultimately what I mean is people, they have unconscious emotions that they're not ready to face, and so they project them out into these experiences, normally kind of spiritual bullshitty things, in my humble opinion, like tarot cards and stuff like that. They take it literally because of what they want to believe at the conscious level, because of their unconscious stuff. And again, in my opinion, this is not a real synchronicity. This is actually not the universe or God or truth or whatever talking to you. It's yourself talking to yourself and trying to pull you back to a real foundation of acceptance, so you can actually build on it and then get to that level, if you want to frame it in terms of levels, where you are walking your real path and you're moving towards wholeness instead of holding yourself back by being fragmented and cutting off different parts of yourselves. A lot of the time, when people are doing things like channeling and stuff like that, it's the same thing. Like, they're channeling from wherever they think they're channeling it from, but actually it's just their unconscious mind trying to talk to them in a way where it's still kind of detached. So if it says something that they're not ready to accept yet at the conscious level, they can simply dismiss it as being from outer space or wherever it is that they think they're channeling things from, and then they can kind of start to listen to what they really think at the unconscious level in a way where they're still kind of removed from it. But ultimately, the end point of the healing journey is always going to be embracing your own unconscious stuff to the greatest extent possible, so you can integrate it and then build with it. And a lot of the time, when we're going out there and we're doing all these spiritual things that people do to try and heal themselves and to grow, that's literally all that's going on. The final example of that is with archetypes. You get people that are really into archetypes. They're useful tools if you see them for what they are. But a lot of the time, people take these archetypes literally, especially on the internet. They take these things literally. And again, that keeps them distanced from their own emotions, because if you take an archetype as being totally separate to you whilst using it to connect you to real parts of yourself, well, unless you get to that point where you say, okay, I can integrate this archetype as part of myself and become connected to myself and then let it go because it served its purpose. If you can't do that, then you're always going to be kind of fragmented within yourself. The third takeaway is what I already said about universal consciousness or wholeness, breaking through. My view now of synchronicity is that a real synchronicity is just when the truth breaks through into your life, because you've either released the tension that you were holding onto that stopped you kind of surrendering to life, like in the case of Carl Jung's patient, Or you've done all this inner work, you've learned to manage your conscious mind, which ultimately means deconstructing the ego and seeing what's going on there so you can start to trust life and move towards acceptance. Then you start to look inside your unconscious relationship with yourself. You do the inner work, face your shadow, ultimately, and then you can put yourself in the third level where you're just actually taking action that is aligned with the things that you become aware of, the things you've accepted, and then just the truth about life that you are now able to use as a foundation for moving forward. If you don't know, surprise, surprise, for those who do know, that's the tagline for this little podcast. Deconstruct the ego, integrate the shadow, and then manifest real life or trust real life. Awareness, acceptance, and action. That's the coaching kind of pathway that I use in my coaching practice. Although it's not a linear pathway, it's kind of a cyclical kind of thing. But anyway, first you manage the conscious mind, then you improve your relationship with your unconscious mind. Then you've released the tension that you've been carrying because you've learned to let go of the things that are real. That's when you're going to get these kind of synchronicities that Carl Jung shared with his patient. I had a similar experience with a coaching client once. I said this was going to be a short podcast and I've just totally failed. But anyway, I had a similar experience with a coaching client where we were doing a session in my living room where I'm recording this podcast right now, actually, which is totally irrelevant. And ultimately, this guy, he had been very kind of passive. He'd learned not to take action because he had a lot of shame. He was scared to move forward. He wasn't really living in the way that he wanted to because he had all of this mental chatter holding him back. In the session, we talked about this metaphor that I use quite a lot about a train, where ultimately you're either on the train, which means that you're moving towards your purpose, and day by day, you're kind of acting on it and you're going deeper and deeper into wholeness, or you're at the train station. That means that you've kind of taken yourself away from your purpose and you're kind of just distracting yourself with all kinds of bullshit, let's just say for brevity. As we're having this conversation, the guy starts to get really hyped up. He was getting excited. I could see it kind of shifting him. And I said, look, by the time that you leave this apartment, when you go out of that door, and I pointed to the front door, I said, you're going to be on the train. He got really excited and he was ready for action. But the synchronicity was that as soon as I said that, whilst we'd been having this part of the conversation, there was an Italian coffee mocha on the stove, which is basically, if you don't know, it just kind of, it boils the water and then it sends pressure up through the coffee beans to make the coffee. And it has a steam valve on the side. And as soon as I said, when you leave this apartment, you're getting on the train, it started to whistle like a steam train. I have never heard it do that in my entire life. And I think it's only done it once or twice since, not in any significant way, like no synchronicities there. But at that moment, when we said, right, you're getting on the train, and it started whistling like a steam train, me and this client just looked at each other like, what the hell is going on? That is incredible. Like, we were both flabbergasted. Our flabbers were gasted, as my granddad used to say. And like the Carl Jung thing, Carl Jung's example, that was the same thing. Like, this guy, he had started to let go of the tension he'd been holding onto. He was ready to get on his real path. And then he had a synchronicity. And it's because in that moment, I believe, he was totally present. He'd returned to the present. And ultimately, that's what this is all about. If you are present, or you're letting go of the things that stop you being present, then you're more likely to experience these synchronicities. But that means you're trusting life as well. Because when you're in the present moment, you're trusting life. And so it's not like you're just looking for these signs, like with the angel numbers we were talking about. It's not that you're trying to hide from your emotional stuff, because when you hide from it, that causes you to hide behind the ego, which stops you being present. It means that you've let go of all those things, and then you can truly experience a real synchronicity. And if you go out there and you stay on the path the presence puts you on, then you'll probably experience more and more, because basically you've opened up that positive spiral of going deeper and deeper into wholeness. So that was a podcast about synchronicity. I am so incongruent when it comes to saying that I'm going to make a short video or a short podcast or a short book or a short anything. So I think I should just resolve to just never say that again. But anyway, the 3 takeaways in this episode are, first of all, the synchronicity is a real thing, I believe. I've experienced it many times in my own life, but that there are 3 different levels of potential synchronicity, 2 of which are not synchronistic events, in my opinion. And the third is the real deal. The two initial ones are level of conscious mind, where ultimately we make some kind of a decision to start looking for signs or whatever it is because we don't trust life. And so we're outsourcing our trust and our capacity to believe in ourselves and take action and do the things that we really want to be doing. And we use these signs as a kind of like the stabilizers on a bike, although in most cases, like I said, we never take those off. The second case is the unconscious mind, where our unconscious stuff gets projected out into the world or into a tarot card or into a dream or whatever it is, and we take it literally instead of realizing that it's our unconscious mind communicating to us what's really going on inside us. When we can align those two levels with the truth, which means we see them for what they are, and we accept life as it is, which ultimately means that we surrender to it, we let go of the things we can't control, the short version. If we can do that, then we put ourselves on the path that we're supposed to be on. And when we first return to that path, it's quite likely that we'll have a real synchronicity in the sense of it being an extreme coincidence, let's say, or of extreme significance in that moment. That's because we return to presence. And then if we keep walking in presence and stay true, we'll probably experience more. But at the end of the day, you don't need synchronicities to be real. All you need to do is to let go of anything that holds you back from the truth, and then align yourself with your best understanding of the truth and keep taking action from that place. So if you want a practical exercise for this episode, I would say just keep it very simple, but to keep your eyes open for the kind of synchronicities that you are either experiencing as you move forward in life from this point, or sit and reflect on some of the synchronicities that you've already experienced and think about them in the terms we've shared here. Was it just your conscious mind because you didn't trust life and so you were looking for signs? Was it some emotional thing that was calling out to you that you labeled as a synchronicity, but you didn't actually see was an opportunity for growth because you could integrate and or release whatever that emotional stuff is? Or was it the real deal, which means that you let go of something and you became present? And if so, are you still present? Are you still walking that path? Basically, look at how you've experienced synchronicity and basically just journal on it, reflect on it, see what it means, see what you can still learn. So yeah, a lot of this stuff that I'm talking about is from a new book I'm working on called Trust. That's going to be out probably before the end of 2024. I've got a few more chapters that I want to write. But ultimately, it's all about what we're saying. Raise awareness, accept who you really are, what's going on inside of you, and then let go and take action, do your best and accept the rest. That's how you stay on a real path and you move towards wholeness. If you want to learn more about my coaching, or if you want to learn more about the transformational journey of going from fragmentation to wholeness, I have a free download on my website, a free PDF called Ego, Shadow, Trust. It's just about the transformational journey I've mentioned, basically awareness, acceptance, and action. If you go to my website, ollieanderson.co.uk, there is a link, there's a pop-up that will pop up, or you can go to ollieanderson.co.uk/ego, shadow, trust. If you want to talk to me, you can book a call on my website as well. Just go to the main page. There's buttons all over the place. You can click and book a video call. I hope this made you think. Synchronicity is one of my favorite topics. Probably now that we've had this conversation, we're all going to go out there and experience loads of synchronicities. But whatever happens, stay real, keep walking your own path. Peace to you, and I hope this helped once again. Boom.